The city woke slowly, as if reluctant to face another day of crowded buses, ringing phones, and unspoken burdens. Morning light slipped between tall concrete buildings, landing softly on cracked sidewalks where people hurried past one another without ever really seeing who walked beside them. In this restless place lived a woman named Maribel, whose life had become a quiet battle against circumstances she never chose but never ran from. Maribel was 31, though years of responsibility had etched deeper lines into her face than her age would suggest. She lived in a narrow apartment with peeling paint, a broken heater that hummed more than it warmed, and a window that rattled every time the wind blew. Yet it was also home to her and to her two young children, who slept each night wrapped in blankets she washed and folded with careful hands. Their laughter was the softest sound in her life, and also the strongest. Every morning, Maribel rose before the sun, preparing breakfast from whatever she could stretch from her small pantry. She packed lunches, brushed tangled hair, and made sure her children left for school with smiles that hid how thin their world really was. Once the door closed behind them, she stepped into a life that demanded more than she had, but never stopped asking anyway. She worked at a large corporate office downtown, not as a manager or executive, but as part of the cleaning staff. It was honest work, though it was rarely respected. Each day, she pushed her cart through endless hallways, wiping desks, emptying trash cans, and polishing floors that others walked across without ever noticing the effort behind their shine. Her uniform was plain, her pay was small, and her presence was often invisible. Maribel did not complain. She knew too well how quickly work could disappear and how easily dignity could be taken away if she let bitterness show. She kept her head down, her hands moving steadily, and her heart focused on the people waiting for her at home. But not everyone in the building saw her that way. There was a group of employees on the upper floors who treated the cleaning staff as if they were part of the furniture. They spoke over them, around them, and sometimes about them, never caring who might hear. To them, Maribel was not a mother, not a woman with dreams and fears, but simply a uniform pushing a cart. Their laughter echoed through the corridors on certain days, sharp and careless. It often came when someone spilled coffee or left a mess behind and expected it to disappear without effort. Maribel had learned to move through those moments quietly, collecting what others discarded and leaving no trace of herself behind. Yet even silence has a weight. One afternoon, after a particularly long shift, Maribel paused in a hallway to stretch her tired back. Her hands trembled slightly, aching from hours of scrubbing and lifting. As she leaned against her cart, she could hear voices from a nearby break room. The laughter was loud, filled with the kind of ease that comes from never having to worry about rent or groceries. She did not mean to listen, but the walls were thin and the words floated freely. They spoke of her and others like her, making jokes about their clothes, their accents, and their jobs. They turned real struggles into entertainment, reducing hard lives into something to be mocked and dismissed. Maribel felt each word like a small cut. She had learned to endure many things, but cruelty spoken so casually had a way of slipping past even the strongest defenses. Still, she said nothing. She picked up her cart and continued down the hallway, as if none of it had touched her at tea home that evening. Her children greeted her with tired smiles and stories about their day. Maribel listened carefully, asking questions, offering comfort, and trying to make their small apartment feel safe despite the world outside. When they finally fell asleep, she sat alone at the small kitchen table, looking at a stack of bills she could not yet pay. The numbers blurred together as exhaustion crept into her bones. She thought about the laughter in the break room, about how easy it was for some people to look down on others without ever understanding their lives. She wondered if they had ever gone to bed worried about how to keep the lights on, or if they had ever skipped meals so their children could eat. But Maribel did not let bitterness take root. Instead, she folded the bills neatly and placed them back in their envelope. Tomorrow would come, and she would face it as she always did, with quiet determination and the hope that somehow things would get better. Days turned into weeks, and the routine remained the same. Maribel cleaned offices, wiped away the marks of busy lives, and carried her own struggles silently. The laughter and mocking from the break room did not stop, and sometimes it grew louder, as if fueled by their own sense of superiority. What they did not know was that Maribel carried more than a mop and a paycheck. She carried resilience, patience, and a strength that had been forged through years of sacrifice. They did not know that every time she was overlooked or dismissed, something inside her only grew steadier. The world has a way of keeping score. Even when no one else is watching. One morning, something unexpected happened. As Maribel was cleaning a conference room, she noticed an important-looking folder left behind on a table. It was filled with documents marked with the company's logo and several urgent labels. She did not know what they were, but she knew they were not meant to be forgotten. She picked up the folder, planning to take it to the front desk. In doing so, she unknowingly stepped into a moment that would change far more than just her day. Outside the room, the same voices she had heard mocking her echoed again, still unaware of what was about to unfold. They continued to laugh and judge, blind to the truth that the quiet woman they ignored was about to become part of a story they would never forget. Maribel walked down the hallway with the folder in her hands, unaware that her simple act of responsibility was about to reveal the true measure of who she was and who they were not. The folder in Maribel's hands felt heavier than its thin spine suggested. As she walked down the long, polished hallway toward the front desk, the soft hum of the building surrounded her, unaware of the weight of what she carried. To her, it was simply something important that had been left behind, something that did not belong to her and therefore had to be returned. Yet to the company, those papers held far more than just ink and signatures. They held the future of an entire department and the fragile balance of a business already standing on uncertain ground. Maribel reached the reception area and carefully placed the folder where it would be seen. She did not wait for acknowledgement or praise. Her work had trained her not to expect either. Instead, she turned back toward her cart, ready to return to the quiet rhythm of wiping surfaces and erasing traces of the day. But something shifted almost immediately. Within an hour, the calm of the office was broken by a sudden wave of urgency. Managers moved quickly through the halls, their faces tight with concern. Phones rang more often, and hushed conversations replaced the usual relaxed chatter. The folder Maribel had returned had been part of a confidential project review, one that revealed serious mistakes and risky decisions made by a small group of senior employees. Those mistakes had been buried beneath layers of corporate language and misplaced confidence, but now they were being brought into the light. Maribel noticed the change as she worked. Doors closed more often. Voices lowered. Tension filled the air like a storm waiting to break. She did not know what she had helped uncover, but she could feel that something important was happening. By the afternoon, rumors began to spread. The project, overseen by several high-ranking staff members, was failing. Large sums of money had been misused, and key deadlines had been ignored. The company's leadership had not yet realized the full extent of the damage, but it was becoming clear that someone would soon be held responsible. Among those involved were the very people who had once laughed in the break room at Maribel and her coworkers. They walked more stiffly now, their confident smiles replaced with forced calm. They passed her in the hallway without meeting her eyes, unaware that the quiet woman they had dismissed was the one who had unknowingly set the truth in motion. At tea home that evening, Maribel felt a strange unease she could not explain. She played with her children, helped with homework, and cooked a simple dinner, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the office. Something about the day felt different, as if the air itself had shifted. The next morning, she arrived at work to find a meeting had been called for all staff. It was unusual for the cleaning crew to be included, but everyone was asked to gather in the large conference hall. The room filled with employees of every level, from executives in tailored suits to workers in simple uniforms like Maribel's. As they stood together, a rare silence settled over the crowd. The company's leadership stepped forward, speaking about integrity, responsibility, and the importance of honesty within the organization. They announced that an internal investigation had begun after critical documents had been recovered. Those documents had revealed serious mismanagement and violations of company policy. The names were not spoken aloud yet, but everyone could sense the gravity of what was coming. Maribel stood quietly among the others, her hands folded, her heart steady. She had no idea how closely she was connected to what was unfolding. To her, returning the folder had simply been the right thing to do, but fate was quietly working in the background. Later that day, supervisors began calling certain employees into private offices. One by one, the people who had once laughed and joked about others were pulled away from their desks. Their faces showed fear, confusion, and disbelief as they realized their own actions were being examined. Maribel continued to clean, moving through the building as she always had. Yet now, there was a strange sense of awareness in the air. People began to notice her. Some nodded politely. Others looked at her with curiosity, as if they were only now realizing she had always been there. By the end of the week, the truth had fully emerged. Several senior employees were dismissed for their role in the failed project and the misuse of company resources. The news spread quickly, whispered through hallways and confirmed by official emails. The laughter that once echoed through the break room was gone. In its place was a quiet understanding that no one was beyond accountability. Maribel did not celebrate their downfall. She felt no joy in their misfortune, but she did feel a quiet sense of balance, as if the scales of the world had shifted ever so slightly back toward fairness. And though she did not know it yet, this was only the beginning of how her life, and theirs, would change. The office no longer felt the same. Where there had once been careless laughter and casual arrogance, there was now a careful, uneasy silence. The air itself seemed heavier, as though every employee was walking under the weight of the truth that had finally been revealed. The people who had once ruled the halls with confidence were gone, their desks emptied, their names quietly removed from company directories. Their fall was not loud or dramatic, but it was complete. Maribel continued her work as she always had, moving from room to room with her cart, wiping down desks that no longer belonged to the same people. The surfaces were the same, but something about them felt different, as if the building itself had been cleansed of more than just dust. Yet not everyone who had mocked her was gone. Some remained, spared by technicalities or lesser involvement, but changed by what they had witnessed. They avoided her gaze when she passed. Their steps slowed when they saw her coming, and their voices dropped to whispers. They were beginning to understand something they had never considered before, that the quiet people they had ignored were not powerless, and that dignity did not depend on job titles. Maribel felt their shift in behavior, though she did not seek it. She was not interested in revenge or recognition. Her world still revolved around her children, her bills, and the hope of a better tomorrow. But she could sense regret in the air, drifting like an unspoken apology that no one had the courage to voice. At home, life was just as fragile as it had always been. The refrigerator was often nearly empty by the end of the week, and the sound of the broken heater still filled the nights with an uneasy hum. Yet something subtle had changed within Maribel herself. There was a new steadiness in her, a quiet confidence that came from knowing she had done the right thing when it mattered. Her children noticed it too, though they did not have words for it. They leaned into her more easily, laughed a little more freely, and seemed to feel safer, as if her inner strength was something they could sense even without understanding it. Back at work, a supervisor began watching Maribel more closely, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. He noticed the care she took with her tasks, the way she treated every space as if it mattered. He saw how she stayed late without being asked, how she fixed small problems before they became big ones. In a building where so many had been careless, her quiet dedication stood out. Still, Maribel did not expect anything to come of it. The people who had mocked her now carried their own burdens. Some of them struggled to find new positions within the company. Others were left wondering how their choices had led them to this place. The memory of their laughter now felt hollow and small, echoing back to them with a bitter edge. They began to realize that they had never truly understood Maribel. They had seen her uniform and her tired eyes and assumed that was all there was. They had never imagined the strength it took to live her life, or the courage it took to do the right thing without being seen. One afternoon, as Maribel was cleaning an empty office, she paused to look out the window. The city stretched below her, busy and indifferent, filled with people each carrying their own unseen struggles. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a future that was not defined by survival alone. She did not know what that future would look like, but she felt it waiting for her, just beyond the horizon. Behind her, the office door closed softly, and footsteps approached. The supervisor who had been watching her stood nearby, holding a file in his hands. He did not speak yet, but his presence alone made Maribel's heart beat a little faster. Something was about to change. The moment that had been quietly forming finally arrived, not with loud celebration, but with the steady weight of truth and recognition. The supervisor who stood behind Maribel that afternoon carried more than a file in his hands. He carried the quiet evidence of her integrity, the silent proof of her character, and the unspoken understanding that some people deserved more than the world had given them. Maribel was asked to step away from her card, something that rarely happened unless there was a problem. Her heart tightened with the familiar fear that came from years of being one paycheck away from disaster. Yet what awaited her was not trouble, but something she had never learned to expect. The company, shaken by the recent scandal, had begun to reevaluate more than just its leadership. They were looking closely at how their culture had allowed arrogance, cruelty, and neglect to grow. In that reflection, they had found Maribel. Her return of the lost folder had not only exposed a failing project, it had revealed a person who valued honesty when no one was watching. In a place that had been built on ambition and shortcuts, her simple act of integrity had become a symbol of what the company needed to become. That a new opportunity was offered to her, one that went beyond cleaning floors and emptying trash cans. It was not a miracle or a sudden leap into wealth, but it was a step forward, a position that came with stability, respect, and a chance to grow. Maribel felt the weight of the moment settle over her slowly. It was not just a job change. It was the recognition of her worth. The people who had once mocked her watched quietly as the news spread. Some felt shame, others felt a deep and lasting regret. They remembered their laughter, their careless words, and how easily they had dismissed her humanity. Now, they were forced to confront the truth that she had always been more than they ever imagined. Maribel did not hold their past against them. She carried no bitterness in her heart. Her journey had taught her that anger only added weight to a life already heavy with responsibility. Instead, she focused on the path opening before her, one built not on revenge, but on quiet justice. At home, the change was felt almost immediately. The steady paycheck allowed her to pay overdue bills, repair the heater, and fill the refrigerator without fear. Her children noticed the difference, not just in what she could provide, but in how she smiled more easily, how her shoulders no longer carried the same invisible load. The city outside remained just as busy and indifferent as before, but Maribel walked through it differently now. She had not become someone else. She was still the same woman who woke before dawn, who loved her children fiercely, and who believed in doing the right thing even when it was hard. What had changed was how the world finally saw her. And as for those who had once mocked her struggles, they carried their lesson with them every day. They had learned that no one's worth could be measured by their job title, and that kindness and integrity had a power no amount of arrogance could erase. In the end, Maribel's story was not one of sudden fortune or dramatic revenge. It was a story of quiet resilience, of a woman who endured, who chose honesty, and who was finally met with the justice she deserved. The world may not always be fair, but sometimes, when kindness and courage meet, it finds a way to balance the scales.